Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend a few minutes with Hymn of the Universe by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. This book was originally published in 1961. It's kind of a collection of different writings. Some of them were unpublished and written many decades before, and others were published in other forms and other places. But this collection is called Hymn of the Universe by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. It's the third of the works of Teilhard de Chardin that I have actually read and chatted here on my channel. I previously read The Phenomenon of Man as well as The Future of Man. So, Hymn of the Universe. This is pretty mystical. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was a Catholic priest, but he was also an evolutionary scientist. I believe he was involved with the discovery of Peking man, an early form of human. And so he has this, in all of his writings, he seems to be trying to sort of combine the material world with the spiritual. And so his take on it seems to be that we are, creatures of matter, and that through matter, then we become something greater, something spiritual. So this is pretty mystical. But what I thought I would do, I made notes. I have notes and I have thoughts, and I thought I would just pull out some of the more interesting concepts that I got from reading this relatively short little book, and we'll just review those here. So the first is called The Mass of the World, the Mass on the World. So the Mass on the World, the book kicks off with this Mass that Pierre Teilhard de Chardin holds by himself out in a desert in Asia. He sees the sun coming up and he's just sort of filled with spirit, and he decides to hold a mass. Although he doesn't actually have the bread and wine to perform a Eucharist, he nevertheless performs this mass. There's a quote here that says, "This bread, our toil, is of itself, I know, but an immense fragmentation. This wine, our pain, is no more, I know, than a drought that dissolves." So he's saying that through our struggle of life, we are becoming. It is a type of Eucharist. And so I just thought that was really beautiful. He also talks about a participatory life, about how to lead a participatory life. He says, "I can and I must throw myself into the thick of human endeavor, and with no stopping for breath. For the more fully I play my part, and the more I bring my efforts to bear on the whole surface of reality, the more also will I attain to Christ and cling close to him." So he's not wanting to retreat from the world. He's wanting to participate in the world. And by that participation, then we bring this Christ-like sort of being into being, this sort of Christ-like nature into being. And I thought that was cool. He talks about a without and a within. I believe this was in some of his other writings too, that everything has a without. This is sort of what scientists study. They study the behavior of something, but not, why it does what it does necessarily. And so he says, in all things, there is a within, coextensive with their without. So an atom, is studied for its without, but it's also has a within. He's sort of panpsychic in this sense. He calls himself a natural pantheist at some point in the book. So he sees divinity in everything. He thinks divinity permeates literally everything, including matter. So matter is not something, the material world is not something to be avoided, but to be something that should be lived in, because that's our nature, is to live in it. He talks about mystics and how to be a mystic. There's a quote here that, because he says that he was kind of born to this sort of thoughtful sort of nature. He says, for a long time, a person who's going to be a mystic, he says, for a long time, thinking he is the same as other men, he will try to see as they do, to speak their language, to find contentment in the joys with which they are satisfied. Happy the man who fails to stifle his vision. Happy the man who will not shrink from a passionate questioning of the muses and Sibylle concerning his God. He thinks it's our duty, and we grow spiritually, we grow closer to Christ in his framework when we question things, when we struggle. that the mystic will often try to not like try to fit in, but then they can't help questioning this sort of what is real or what is out there. And so this is the life of a mystic, and it's not as comfortable as a life of just accepting things the way they are and just living this sort of happy life. It is a bit of a struggle, but he thinks it's well worth it. He says, happy's the man who fails to conform. So the conforming then would sort of stifle this sort of searching. So he thinks our path is to actually search, spiritually search, and find the divine, everywhere. So he talks about love as the spiritual evolution. So love is an engine. So love is this thing that we have that it just creates. It's the whole thing that moves the cosmos. He makes this point, I believe, in either, I think it's The Future of Man, maybe also in The Phenomenon of Man. But he says, in such a system, it is impossible to love one's neighbor without drawing closer to God, and vice versa for that matter. This we know well enough, but it is also impossible, and this is less familiar to us, to love either God or our neighbor without being obliged to help in the progress of the earthly synthesis of spirit. So he's saying we can't get close to God without loving others. And likewise, we can't love people without being close to God. So vice versa, right? But that both of those, like when we do that, we can't help but being sort of obliged to sort of like participate in the progress of the earth. He sees Earth as an evolution. He's interested in evolution, right? He was an evolutionary scientist. So he has this idea of, like there was a geologic evolution, there's biologic evolution, and there's a spiritual evolution. And he thinks Christianity is a path of evolution. It's not some static thing. It is a thing that is still dynamic and that still is changing people and it's changing the world in his view. And so I thought that was really interesting. So speaking of religion, he has this idea that religion, often I think we think of religion as this force of traditionalism. Not to Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He says, only he who has fought bravely and been victorious in the struggle against the spurious security and strength and attraction of the past can attain to the firm and blissful experiential certainty that the more we lose all foothold in the darkness and instability of the future, the more deeply we penetrate into God. He's saying that religion is actually not traditionalism, that we shouldn't be holding on to the past, that it's only when we give up the struggle to hold on to the past, the security and the attraction of the past, that we can sort of walk into the unknown of the future, and it's that way that we grow spiritually. I just love that. I think that's so interesting. So he talks about humanity is sleeping. This is sort of reminding me sort of like the age of Aquarius. He thinks that humanity's on the cusp of awakening or a reawakening to this notion of spirituality as this dynamic force. He says, I shall cooperate with that divine power through which you act upon me and anticipate my initiatives, and I shall do so in two ways. First, to that profound inspiration whereby you impel me to seek the fullness of being, I shall respond by striving never to stifle or distort or squander my powers of loving and making. He made this point several times in different sort of writings where, the person needs to be their full self. So your full self, to be your full best self, and to not shy away from becoming that self, that the Spirit would lead you to be your best self. And so that's the first thing he says. But then he says, and then to your all-embracing providence, which is kind of like fate, which at each moment shows me through the events of the day the next step I must take, the next rung I must climb. I shall respond by striving never to miss an opportunity of rising up towards the realm of spirit. So this dynamic spiritual growth he expects of us, right? He says, like, first, okay, it's the inspiration to become your full self, to become your best self. And when you have done that, then the next thing is whenever things are put in your path that you meet them. You meet them fully, and you meet them. You climb. If it's a struggle, you overcome the struggle, and it's through this way that you rise and become closer to the divine. I just think that is so cool. Okay, I think I will leave the chat with that. I enjoyed reading this immensely. It was a little hard to find. I found this used copy, but I'm really glad that I did find a copy and got it read. I will look around for some more Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. I'm not sure what else is out there other than these three works were what I had heard of his. So I'll do a little research and we shall see. But my next chat, I'm going to switch gears to some dystopian science fiction. We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. I have finished this already, and I will have a chat on it coming up soon. So until next time, take care.